The rain hammered against the windows of Rosewood Bistro like nature's own percussion section, creating the perfect soundtrack for what should have been just another Friday night dinner with friends. Jake Morrison pushed through the heavy oak doors, shaking droplets from his leather jacket, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. "Table for 4 under Richardson," his buddy Marcus announced to the hostess, while Jake's other friends, Tommy and Ben, debated whether the storm outside was worth the legendary tiramisu they'd driven 30 minutes through downtown Chicago to try. "Right this way, gentlemen," the hostess smiled, leading them through the warmly lit restaurant where couples shared intimate conversations over flickering candlelight, and the soft jazz created an atmosphere that felt like stepping into a romantic movie. Jake was mid-sentence telling some ridiculous story about his disastrous presentation at work when she appeared. Time didn't just slow down, it stopped entirely. She glided between the tables with the grace of a dancer, balancing 3 plates on one arm while effortlessly maneuvering through the crowded dining room. Her honey blonde hair caught the amber light from the vintage chandeliers, and when she laughed at something an elderly customer said, the sound was like music that made every other noise in the restaurant fade to silence. "Dude, you're staring," Marcus whispered. But Jake couldn't hear him. She moved with purpose but never rushed, taking time to refill water glasses, check on her tables, and somehow make every customer feel like they were the only people in the room. When she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear while writing down an order, Jake's heart did something it had never done before. It completely forgot how to beat properly. "Earth to Jake," Tommy laughed, snapping his fingers. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," Jake murmured, still transfixed. "An angel." She was now just 3 tables away, and Jake could see the small constellation of freckles across her nose, the way her green eyes sparkled when she smiled, and how she bit her lower lip in concentration while calculating the bill for a young couple. "Oh no," Ben groaned, recognizing the look on his friend's face. "Here we go again. Remember what happened with the barista at Starbucks? And the librarian? And that girl at the gym?" But this was different. Jake had never felt anything like this before. This overwhelming certainty that somehow, impossibly, he was looking at his future. She was getting closer now, and Jake realized with growing panic that he had absolutely no idea what to say to her. His usual charm had abandoned him completely. His palms were sweating, his mouth was dry, and he was pretty sure he'd forgotten how to form coherent sentences. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, appearing at their table like a vision. Her voice was warm honey with just a hint of a southern accent. "I'm Riley, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Jake opened his mouth to speak, but the only sound that came out was a strangled, "Gah." Marcus kicked him under the table. "What my articulate friend here is trying to say is that we'll have a bottle of your house red, and he'll have a glass of water, because he's apparently having some kind of medical episode." Riley's eyes crinkled with amusement as she looked at Jake, who was turning an impressive shade of crimson. "Are you okay, hun? You look a little flushed." I'm perfect," Jake managed to croak out, his voice cracking like a 13-year-old boy. "I mean, I'm fine. Perfectly fine. Not perfect, just fine." "Well, that's good to hear," Riley said with a gentle smile that made Jake's knees weak even though he was sitting down. "I'll get that wine started for you." As she walked away, Jake watched her go with the expression of a man who'd just witnessed a miracle. "Smooth," Tommy said dryly. "Real smooth. I especially liked the part where you made sounds like a dying walrus." "She's perfect," Jake breathed, still staring after her. "She's a waitress doing her job," Ben pointed out. "And you're acting like a crazy person." "I'm going to marry her," Jake announced with absolute certainty. His 3 friends exchanged looks of concern and amusement. "Jake, buddy," Marcus said gently. "You don't even know her last name." "Details," Jake waved dismissively, his eyes still following Riley as she moved between tables with that same effortless grace. "Did you see the way she smiled? And her laugh? And those eyes? They're like eyes?" Tommy suggested helpfully. "Like emeralds," Jake said dreamily. "Beautiful, perfect emeralds. "Oh, this is bad," Ben muttered. "This is really, really bad." Riley returned with their wine, and Jake tried to act normal, but normal had apparently left the building. When she asked if they were ready to order, he nodded so enthusiastically that he nearly gave himself whiplash. "I'll have whatever you recommend," he said, gazing at her with the intensity of a man solving the mysteries of the universe. "Well, our special tonight is pan-seared salmon with—" "Perfect," Jake interrupted. "I love salmon. I mean, I've never had salmon, but I love it. I love fish, all fish, especially salmon fish." Riley bit her lip to keep from laughing, but Jake caught the twinkle in her eyes. "One salmon it is. And for you, gentlemen?" After taking the rest of their orders, she started to leave, but Jake's brain finally kicked into gear. "Wait!" he called out a little too loudly. Several nearby diners turned to look. Excuse me, Riley." She turned back, eyebrows raised expectantly. I wanted to say, you're really good at this. The waitressing thing. Very professional and graceful like a swan. A beautiful, graceful swan." Riley's smile widened, and Jake realized he'd just compared her to a water bird. "Thank you," she said, clearly charmed despite herself. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." As she walked away this time, Jake slumped back in his chair, grinning like an idiot. "A swan?" Marcus asked incredulously. "You compared her to a swan?" "It worked, didn't it?" Jake said, watching Riley glide between tables. She smiled. "She was trying not to laugh at you," Ben corrected. "Same thing," Jake said happily. For the rest of the evening, Jake found excuses to get Riley's attention. He asked for extra napkins, more water, another fork because his first one didn't feel right, and whether she thought the lighting was too dim, it wasn't. Each time she approached their table with that same warm smile, and each time, Jake fell a little deeper. When she brought the check, Jake's heart sank. The evening was ending, and he realized he might never see her again. "Here you go," she said, placing the leather folder on the table. "I hope you enjoyed everything." "Best meal of my life," Jake said, and meant it, even though he couldn't remember tasting a single bite. As his friends argued over the tip calculation, Jake noticed Riley had written something on the receipt. His heart stopped. In neat handwriting she'd written, "Thanks for making me laugh tonight. Hope to see you again soon. Riley." Jake looked up to find her across the restaurant clearing a table. As if she could feel his gaze, she turned and gave him a small wave and that heart-stopping smile. "I'm definitely coming back," he announced to his friends. "We figured," Marcus said dryly. "Question is, will you be able to form complete sentences next time?" Jake carefully folded the receipt and put it in his wallet, right next to his driver's license where he'd see it every day. "I'll practice," he said solemnly. "I'll practice until I'm perfect." As they left the restaurant, Jake turned back one more time. Riley was helping an elderly man with his coat, her kindness evident in every gesture. She looked up, caught him watching, and gave him one more smile that lit up the entire restaurant. Walking out into the rain, Jake felt like he was floating. The storm that had seemed so miserable an hour ago now felt like nature's way of bringing him exactly where he needed to be. "You're really going to do this, aren't you?" Tommy asked, watching his friend's expression. "I'm going to do this," Jake confirmed, already planning his return. He had no idea that across town, Riley was telling her roommate about the sweet, awkward guy who'd compared her to a swan and made her laugh harder than she had in months. Love at first sight, they both thought, not knowing the other was thinking the exact same thing. Jake Morrison had been planning his return to Rosewood Bistro for exactly 72 hours, 16 minutes, and, he checked his watch, 37 seconds. He'd rehearsed conversations in the mirror, practiced his order in 3 different voices, and even watched YouTube videos on how to be charming, which, embarrassingly, were actually helpful. "Okay, Morrison," he muttered to himself, straightening his tie for the 5th time as he sat in his car outside the restaurant. "You're a successful architect. You've presented to Fortune 500 companies. You can handle one beautiful waitress who makes your brain turn to mush. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Did you chicken out yet? Jake typed back, I'm going in. If I don't text you in 2 hours, assume I died of embarrassment. Will do. Try not to compare her to any other animals this time. Taking a deep breath, Jake walked through those same oak doors, immediately scanning the restaurant for Riley. The hostess, a different one from Friday night, approached with a smile. Table for one? Actually, I was hoping to sit in Riley's section, Jake said, then immediately worried that sounded stalkerish. I mean, she was our waitress the other night and the service was exceptional, very professional. 5 stars. The hostess's knowing smile suggested she'd heard this request before. Of course, right this way. Jake was led to a small table by the window, where the afternoon sunlight created a warm, golden atmosphere completely different from the romantic, candlelit ambiance of Friday night. He was early for the dinner rush, which meant the restaurant was quieter, more intimate. Perfect for conversation, if he could remember how to have one. Well, look who's back, came that familiar honey-sweet voice behind him. Jake turned so quickly he nearly knocked over his water glass. Riley stood there in a fresh uniform, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, looking even more beautiful in the natural light. Riley, he said, his voice hitting a pitch that would make dogs howl. He cleared his throat and tried again. Hey, Riley. Hi. Hi yourself, she said, sliding into the chair across from him with an easy familiarity that made his heart skip. I wasn't sure you'd come back after the other night. Why wouldn't I come back? Jake asked, genuinely confused. Riley tilted her head, studying him with those incredible green eyes. Well, you did look like you were having some kind of medical emergency. And you ordered salmon even though you'd never had it before, which was either very brave or very concerning. How was the salmon, by the way? She continued, and Jake realized with growing horror that he had absolutely no memory of eating it. It was fishy, he offered weakly. Riley burst into laughter, that same musical sound that had stopped time 3 days ago. Fishy? That's your review of our chef's signature dish? It was fishy? In a good way. Jake backpedaled frantically. The best fishy I've ever had. Top-tier fishiness. You're making it worse, Riley said, but she was still laughing. I know, Jake admitted, running a hand through his hair. I'm not usually this, whatever this is. Normally I'm quite articulate. I design buildings. Complex buildings, with words. I use words professionally. You design buildings with words? Riley asked, clearly enjoying his flustered state. No, Jake stopped, took a breath, and started over. I'm an architect. I design buildings with blueprints and engineering and stuff. I use words to explain the buildings, to clients, who think I'm competent. And are you competent? At architecture? Yes. At talking to beautiful women? Apparently not. The compliment slipped out before Jake could stop it, and he watched Riley's cheeks turn the faintest shade of pink. You think I'm beautiful? She asked softly. I think you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, Jake said, his honesty overriding his nervousness. I think you're graceful and kind and funny, and I think I've been thinking about you for 3 straight days, which is probably creepy, but I can't seem to stop. Riley was quiet for a moment, and Jake was sure he'd blown it completely. Then she smiled, not the polite professional smile she gave customers, but something softer, more real. That's not creepy, she said. That's sweet. Really? Really? Although I have to ask, why didn't you just ask for my number the other night? Jake gestured vaguely at himself. Have you met me? I could barely remember my own name, let alone figure out how to ask for yours. Fair point, Riley conceded. So what's your plan now? Are you going to keep coming back here and ordering food you don't remember eating until you work up the courage to ask me out? That was exactly my plan, actually, Jake admitted. I was going to order something different each time so I could rate the fishiness of your entire menu. That's either very romantic or very expensive, Riley said. Both, Jake agreed. but mostly romantic. I hoped. Riley was quiet again, and Jake held his breath. I get off at 6, she said finally. Does that mean? There's a coffee shop called Brew and Bean 2 blocks down, Riley continued. They have excellent non-fishy pastries. Are you asking me out? Jake asked, his heart doing that irregular beating thing again. I'm giving you the opportunity to ask me out, Riley corrected. Less pressure that way. Jake sat up straighter, channeling every ounce of confidence he'd ever possessed. Riley, would you like to have coffee with me at 6 o'clock at Brew and Bean so we can discuss the relative fishiness of various cuisines? I thought you'd never ask, Riley said with a grin that lit up the entire restaurant. Really? Just like that? Just like that. Riley stood up, smoothing her apron. Although I should probably mention that I've been thinking about you for 3 days too. Especially the swan comment. That was a first. Good first or bad first? Jury's still out, Riley said teasingly. But I'm curious to see what other animals you'll compare me to. Jake watched her walk away, his mind racing with possibilities. A gazelle? A butterfly? No. He needed to stop thinking about animals entirely. 20 minutes later, Riley returned with his order, something called the catch of the day that Jake had selected purely because it wasn't salmon. 1 non-salmon fish, she announced, setting the plate down. In case you wanted to expand your fishy vocabulary. You're making fun of me, Jake observed. A little, Riley admitted, but in a fond way. I can live with fond, Jake said, then looked down at his plate. What is this exactly? Mahi-mahi with mango salsa, Riley said. And before you ask, it's supposed to taste like fish, but in a tropical, not too fishy kind of way. Perfect. I'll report back on the tropical fishiness level. I'll be waiting with bated breath, Riley said with a laugh. This time Jake actually tasted his food and it was delicious. He made a mental note to compliment the chef, assuming he could remember how to speak by the time Riley returned. The afternoon passed in a pleasant blur of Riley stopping by his table whenever she had a free moment. She told him about her morning classes at the community college. She was studying business management, her ridiculous roommate who left dirty dishes in the sink for weeks, and her secret addiction to terrible reality TV shows. Jake found himself relaxing, his natural charm finally making an appearance. He told her about his worst architectural disaster, a house where he'd accidentally put the bathroom door opening into the kitchen, his 3 best friends who were probably planning an intervention about his sudden swan obsession, and his own terrible addiction to cooking shows despite being unable to make anything more complicated than toast. You watch cooking shows but can't cook? Riley asked during one of her visits. I have dreams of being a chef, Jake explained. I just lack the fundamental skills of, cooking. That's tragic, Riley said solemnly. A man who appreciates fine cuisine but can't create it. My microwave and I have a very functional relationship, Jake defended. We understand each other. I'll have to cook for you sometime, Riley said casually, then seemed to realize what she'd implied. I mean, if we... I'd love that, Jake said quickly. Fair warning though, I might compare your cooking to something animal-related. It's apparently a thing I do now. As long as it's not a fish, Riley said. Deal. At 5:30, Riley approached his table with the check and a slightly nervous expression. So this is happening, right? She asked. Coffee at 6? Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Jake said, then paused. Sorry, another animal reference. I really need to work on that. Actually, I kind of like it, Riley admitted. It's uniquely you. Jake paid his bill, leaving a generous tip, and stood to go. See you in 30 minutes, he said. Jake? Riley called as he reached the door. Yeah? Maybe brush your teeth or something. You taste like mango salsa. Jake laughed, his nervousness finally fading completely. Best advice I've gotten all day. As he walked to his car, Jake felt like he was floating. He had a date. An actual date with the most amazing woman he'd ever met. And she'd been thinking about him too. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Status report? Jake typed back. Coffee date in 30 minutes. She thinks I'm sweet. Miracle. Try not to screw it up. Thanks for the vote of confidence. That's what friends are for. Good luck, Romeo. Jake drove home in record time, brushed his teeth twice, changed his shirt, and made it to Brew and Bean with 5 minutes to spare. He found a corner table with a good view of the door and waited, his heart beating faster with each passing minute. At exactly 6 o'clock, Riley walked through the door and Jake's breath caught in his throat. She'd changed out of her uniform into a simple sundress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a romantic movie. Her hair was loose now, catching the light from the coffee shop's warm pendant lamps. Hi, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Hi, Jake replied, thinking that he'd never get tired of looking at her. So, Riley said, folding her hands on the table, tell me about these buildings you design with words. And just like that, Jake knew this was going to be the best date of his life. The first thing Jake noticed about Brew and Bean was that it smelled like heaven mixed with possibility. The second thing he noticed was that Riley looked absolutely stunning in the warm amber lighting. The third thing he noticed was that he was staring again. You clean up nice, Riley said, settling into her chair with a smile that made Jake's heart do that irregular rhythm thing. So do you, Jake replied, then immediately worried that sounded like he was saying she looked bad at work. I mean, not that you didn't look nice before, you always look incredible, I just meant… Jake, Riley interrupted gently, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Yeah? Breathe. Jake took a deep breath, then laughed at himself. Sorry, I'm nervous. This is my first date in, well, let's just say it's been a while. Mine too, Riley admitted, and Jake felt some of his tension ease. What can I get you? My treat since you've been single-handedly keeping our restaurant in business this week. I'll have whatever you're having, Jake said, then caught himself. Wait, no, that's what I said about the salmon. Let me actually make a decision like a functioning adult. Riley laughed, that beautiful sound that Jake was quickly becoming addicted to. How about I surprise you? Only if you promise it won't be fishy. Deal. While Riley went to order, Jake took a moment to appreciate his surroundings. Brew and Bean was the kind of place that felt like a warm hug. Exposed brick walls covered with local artwork, mismatched vintage furniture, and soft jazz playing in the background. It was intimate without being overwhelming, casual without being careless. Perfect for a first date. Riley returned with 2 steaming mugs and a plate of what looked like the most decadent chocolate croissants Jake had ever seen. Vanilla latte with an extra shot, she said, sliding one mug toward him. And chocolate croissants that are basically dessert masquerading as pastry. Jake took a sip of his latte and nearly groaned with pleasure. This is incredible. How did you know? Lucky guess, Riley said, but there was something in her expression that suggested it was more than that. You seem like a vanilla latte kind of guy. What does that mean exactly? Riley considered this, wrapping her hands around her mug. Classic, reliable, but with a little extra something to make it interesting. Not too complicated, but definitely not boring. I'll take that as a compliment, Jake said, feeling ridiculously pleased with her assessment. It was definitely a compliment, Riley confirmed, breaking off a piece of croissant. So Jake, the architect who designs buildings with words, tell me something I don't know about you. Something you don't know, Jake mused, trying to think of something that would impress her without sounding like he was trying too hard to impress her. I'm terrified of butterflies. Riley nearly choked on her coffee. Butterflies? Terrified, Jake confirmed solemnly. They're unpredictable. They flutter around with no apparent pattern or logic. How do you defend against something that moves like that? They're butterflies, Jake. They're like flying flowers. Flying flowers with no respect for personal space, Jake said. One landed on my nose when I was 7 and I've never recovered. Riley was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Your turn, Jake said, enjoying the way her eyes lit up when she laughed. Tell me something ridiculous about you. I talk to my plants, Riley said without hesitation. Full conversations. I ask them about their day, tell them about mine. My roommate thinks I'm crazy. Do they talk back? Not yet, but I'm optimistic. Jake grinned. I think that's adorable. Really? Most people think it's weird. Most people don't have the imagination to understand that plants are excellent listeners, Jake said seriously. They never interrupt, never judge, never try to give unsolicited advice. Exactly, Riley said, leaning forward with enthusiasm. You get it. What kind of plants do you have? A fiddle-leaf fig named Fernando, a snake plant called Samantha, and a succulent garden that I collectively refer to as the squad. The squad? They're very tight-knit, always in each other's business. Jake laughed, realizing that he was having more fun than he'd had in months. I'd like to meet them sometime. They'd like that, Riley said, then seemed to realize what she'd implied. I mean, if things, if we... I'd really like that, Jake said softly, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. The moment their skin touched, everything else in the coffee shop seemed to fade away. Riley's eyes widened slightly, and Jake felt that same electric connection he'd experienced the first time he saw her. Jake? Riley said quietly. Yeah? I have a confession. Jake's heart skipped. What kind of confession? I've been thinking about you since Friday night too. More than thinking, actually. I've been wondering what it would be like to have coffee with you, to hear you laugh, to see if you're as sweet as you seemed when you were stumbling over your words. And? Jake asked, hardly daring to breathe. You're sweeter, Riley said, her cheeks turning pink. And funnier. And those butterflies don't know what they're missing. Jake felt like he might float right out of his chair. Riley, There's something else, Riley interrupted, her expression becoming more serious. I want to be honest with you. Jake's stomach dropped. Here it comes, he thought. The reason this is too good to be true. I don't usually do this, Riley continued. Date customers, I mean. I have a rule about mixing work and personal life. But there's something about you that made me want to break that rule. What kind of something? Jake asked, hardly daring to hope. The kind of something that makes me check the door every time it opens, hoping it's you. The kind of something that makes me practice conversations in my head. The kind of something that makes me change my outfit 3 times before a coffee date. Jake stared at her, overwhelmed. You changed your outfit 3 times? 4, actually. But who's counting? I changed mine twice, Jake admitted. And I brushed my teeth 3 times. Good, Riley said with a grin. I'd hate to think I was the only one who was nervous. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands still touching across the table, both processing the weight of their mutual confessions. So what happens now? Jake asked finally. Now we finish our coffee and these amazing croissants, Riley said practically. And then maybe you could walk me to my car and we could figure out when we're going to see each other again. I'd like that, Jake said. All of it. The next hour passed in a blur of easy conversation and growing connection. They talked about everything and nothing. Riley's dreams of opening her own restaurant someday. Jake's worst architectural disasters. Their shared love of terrible 80s movies. And their equally terrible cooking skills. I once tried to make pancakes from scratch, Riley confessed, and somehow managed to set off the smoke alarm without actually cooking anything. That's impressive, Jake said. I once tried to make spaghetti and ended up with what I can only describe as pasta concrete. How do you mess up spaghetti? Apparently by not adding enough water and then walking away to watch TV for an hour. That's actually kind of amazing, in a horrifying way. I have many talents, Jake said modestly. Most of them involve destroying food. As the coffee shop began to empty around them, Jake realized he didn't want the evening to end. Riley seemed to feel the same way, lingering over her empty mug and picking at the last crumbs of her croissant. I should probably get going, she said finally, but she made no move to leave. Probably, Jake agreed, also not moving. Early morning classes tomorrow. Right. Education is important. Very important. They looked at each other and burst into laughter. This is ridiculous, Riley said. We're both adults. We can acknowledge that we don't want this to end. I really don't want this to end, Jake said honestly. This has been the best evening I've had in years. Me too, Riley said softly. Which is why I'm going to suggest something that might be a little forward. Jake's heart rate spiked. What kind of forward? There's a night market downtown that's open until midnight. Food trucks, live music, local vendors. It's touristy and probably crowded, but... She trailed off, looking uncertain. But? Jake prompted. But I'd really like to go there with you. Right now. If you're up for it. Jake didn't hesitate. I'm up for it. Really? You don't think it's too much for a first date? Riley, Jake said, standing and extending his hand to her. I compared you to a swan within 5 minutes of meeting you. I think we're past worrying about what's too much. Riley took his hand, and Jake felt that same electric connection multiply by 1,000. Besides, he added as they walked toward the door, I have a feeling that with you there's no such thing as too much. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Riley asked as they stepped out into the warm evening air. With you? Jake said, squeezing her hand gently. Definitely a good thing. As they walked hand in hand toward the night market, Jake caught a glimpse of their reflection in a shop window. They looked like they belonged together, natural, comfortable. Right? Jake, Riley said as they reached the bustling market, alive with lights and music and the smell of amazing food. Yeah? I'm really glad you came back to the restaurant. Me too, Jake said, meaning it more than he'd ever meant anything in his life. Ready for adventure? Riley asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. With you, I'm ready for anything. And as they disappeared into the crowd, both of them knew that this was just the beginning of something extraordinary. 3 weeks into what Jake was convinced was the most perfect relationship in the history of human romance, everything started falling apart on a Tuesday. It began innocently enough. Jake was at his drafting table, actually humming, while working on blueprints for a new community center, when his business partner David burst through the office door with the enthusiasm of a man who just won the lottery. Jake, my friend, pack your bags, David announced dramatically. We just landed the Morrison Hartley account. Jake looked up confused. The what account? Morrison Hartley, the luxury resort chain? They want us to design their flagship location in Hawaii. David was practically bouncing. This is it, Jake. This is the break we've been waiting for. Hawaii? Jake's stomach dropped. For how long? 6 months, maybe 8, full relocation. They want us on site for the entire project. David finally noticed Jake's expression. Why do you look like I just told you your dog died? I can't go to Hawaii for 6 months, Jake said, panic creeping into his voice. Why not? You love Hawaii. You've been saying for years that you wanted to work on a tropical project. That was before, Jake said weakly. Before what? Before Riley. David's expression shifted from excitement to concern. Jake, buddy, we've been through this. It's been 3 weeks. You can't turn down the opportunity of a lifetime for a 3-week relationship. It's not just any relationship, Jake protested. This is different. That's what you said about Sarah, and before that Jessica, and before that. This is nothing like those relationships, Jake interrupted, his voice rising. Riley is... She's what? The love of your life after 3 weeks? Jake stared at his best friend and business partner, realizing with crystal clarity that yes, that was exactly what Riley was. But saying it out loud would make him sound like a crazy person. I need time to think, Jake said finally. We need an answer by Friday, David said, his excitement dampened by Jake's reaction. Jake, I get it. She seems great. But this is our future we're talking about. After David left, Jake spent the rest of the day staring at his computer screen, unable to focus on anything except the impossible choice he was facing. How could he explain to Riley that he might have to disappear to Hawaii for 8 months? How could he explain to David that he'd rather give up his dream project than spend a day away from the woman who'd completely turned his world upside down? His phone buzzed with a text from Riley. "Dinner tonight? I'm making my famous pasta disaster. Fair warning, it might actually be inedible." Jake stared at the message, his heart aching. "Can't wait," he typed back, then immediately deleted it. He typed and deleted a dozen different responses before finally settling on "looking forward to it." Something felt wrong about the message, but he couldn't figure out what. Meanwhile, across town, Riley was having her own crisis. "You're glowing," her roommate and best friend Madison observed as Riley attempted to make pasta that wouldn't resemble concrete. "It's disgusting." "I'm not glowing," Riley protested, but she caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of the microwave and had to admit Madison had a point. "You're humming while cooking," Madison continued. "You, who once set water on fire, are humming while cooking. It's like watching a Disney princess come to life." "I did not set water on fire," Riley said defensively. "I left the pot on the stove too long and the water evaporated and then the pot overheated and... Okay, fine. I basically set water on fire." "My point exactly. And now look at you. Jake has turned you into a functioning human being." Riley smiled despite herself. Jake had that effect on her. In 3 weeks, he'd become the best part of every day. Their dates had ranged from elaborate dinner at the fanciest restaurant in the city where Jake had impressively managed not to compare her to any animals, to simple grocery shopping, which had somehow turned into the most romantic hour of Riley's life when Jake insisted on carrying her basket and made her laugh until she cried in the cereal aisle. "Speaking of Jake," Madison said carefully, "my cousin Emma was at that new gallery opening downtown last night." Something in Madison's tone made Riley look up from her pasta disaster. "Okay?" She saw Jake there, with a woman. Riley's stomach dropped. "What kind of woman?" "Tall, blonde, gorgeous, designer dress." They looked close. The wooden spoon slipped from Riley's suddenly numb fingers, clattering to the floor. "Close how?" "Emma said they were holding hands, deep in conversation. Very intimate." Riley stared at her roommate, trying to process this information. Jake had told her he was working late last night. He'd texted her around 8 to say he was buried in blueprints and would call her today. "Maybe it was business," Riley said weakly. "Jake meets with clients." "At an art gallery? At night? Holding hands?" Riley's phone buzzed with Jake's response to her dinner invitation. "Looking forward to it." The message was cold, formal. Nothing like his usual texts, which were full of exclamation points and random thoughts and sweet observations about his day. This sounded like something he'd send to a business colleague. "I need to ask him about it," Riley said. But even as she said it, she felt doubt creeping in. What if Madison was right? What if she'd been reading too much into their relationship? 3 weeks wasn't very long. Maybe she'd just been a fun distraction while he was between more serious relationships. "Riley," Madison said gently, "I don't want to see you get hurt." "I know," Riley said, staring at her phone. "I know." By the time Jake arrived at Riley's apartment that evening, both of them were carrying the weight of their respective secrets and doubts. Jake had spent the entire drive over trying to figure out how to bring up Hawaii, while Riley had spent the same time trying to figure out how to bring up the mystery woman. "Hi," Riley said when she opened the door, and Jake immediately noticed that something was off. Her smile was too bright, too forced. "Hi," Jake replied, leaning in to kiss her cheek. The gesture felt stilted, awkward. "How was your day?" "Fine," Riley said, stepping back. "Just fine. How was yours?" "Fine," Jake echoed. They stood in her living room, suddenly strangers. The easy comfort they developed over the past 3 weeks had evaporated, replaced by a tension neither of them knew how to address. "So," Riley said, wrapping her arms around herself, "the pasta is definitely inedible. I ordered pizza instead. Hope that's okay." "That's fine," Jake said, then caught himself being formal again. "I mean, that's great. I love pizza. You know that." "Right," Riley said. "I know that." Another awkward silence. "Riley," Jake said finally, "is everything okay? You seem different." Riley's carefully constructed composure cracked slightly. Different how? I don't know. Distant, maybe? I could ask you the same thing, Riley said, her voice sharper than she intended. Your text today was very formal. Jake frowned. Formal? Looking forward to it? That's what you'd write to your dentist. I was distracted at work, Jake said defensively. I didn't realize I was being graded on my texting style. You're being graded on everything, Jake, Riley snapped, then immediately regretted it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. No, clearly you did mean it, Jake said, his own frustration building. What's this really about, Riley? Riley stared at him, debating whether to bring up the gallery sighting. Part of her wanted to give him a chance to explain. Part of her was terrified of what that explanation might be. Where were you last night? She asked finally. Jake's confusion was evident. Working, I told you that. At the office? Yes, at the... Jake stopped, realization dawning. Wait, why are you asking? Someone saw you, Riley said quietly, at a gallery downtown with a woman. Jake's face went through several emotions, confusion, understanding, and then something that looked almost like relief. Oh, he said. That? That? Riley repeated, her heart sinking. That's all you have to say? Riley, I can explain. I'm sure you can, Riley interrupted, tears threatening. I'm sure you have a perfectly reasonable explanation for lying to me about where you were and who you were with. I wasn't lying, Jake protested. It's complicated. Complicated, Riley repeated. Right. The pizza arrived at that moment, creating an even more awkward interruption. Riley paid the delivery guy while Jake stood helplessly in her living room, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. Look, Jake said when Riley returned with the pizza. The woman at the gallery was Victoria. She's a client. We were discussing a project. A client you hold hands with? I wasn't... Jake stopped, running his hand through his hair. Okay, maybe I was, but not romantically. She was upset about something personal, and I was being supportive. And you couldn't tell me about this because... Jake was quiet for a long moment. Because I knew how it would look. So instead you lied. I didn't lie. I just didn't mention it. That's called lying, Jake. Jake stared at her, realizing she was right. He had lied, by omission if nothing else. And now everything was spiraling out of control. And he still hadn't told her about Hawaii. There's something else, he said quietly. Riley's face went pale. What kind of something else? I might have to go to Hawaii for work for 6 months. The silence that followed was deafening. When? Riley asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Soon. Maybe next week. And when were you planning to tell me this? I don't know, Jake admitted. I've been trying to figure out how. How about Riley? I might have to leave for 6 months. That would have been a good start. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple, Riley said, tears now flowing freely. You're leaving, just like everyone else. That's not fair, Jake protested. This isn't my choice. Isn't it? You could say no. I can't just say no. This is my career, my future. What about us? What about our future? Jake stared at her, realizing that he didn't have a good answer. Because the truth was, he hadn't been thinking about their future beyond the next date, the next kiss, the next perfect moment. He'd been living in the present, and now the future was crashing down around them. I don't know, he said finally, and watched Riley's heart break. Get out, she said quietly. Riley, please just go. Jake stood there for a moment, wanting to fight for her, wanting to fix this but not knowing how. Everything he'd said had only made things worse. I'm sorry, he said finally. So am I, Riley replied, not looking at him. Jake left, and Riley collapsed onto her couch, staring at the untouched pizza and wondering how the best 3 weeks of her life had just turned into the worst night. Across town, Jake sat in his car outside her apartment building for 2 hours, trying to work up the courage to go back and fix things. But every scenario he imagined ended the same way, with him admitting that he was choosing his career over her, because that's what it came down to. By the time he finally drove home, both of them had reached the same conclusion. Sometimes love isn't enough, but neither of them was ready to accept that conclusion just yet. Jake Morrison had always prided himself on being a logical, rational person. He designed buildings using precise measurements and careful calculations. He made decisions based on facts and long-term planning. He did not make impulsive, potentially career-destroying choices based on 3 weeks of the most incredible relationship of his life. Except apparently, he did. It took him exactly 4 days of misery to realize that living without Riley wasn't living at all. It was just existing in a world that had suddenly lost all its color. 4 days of staring at the Hawaii project files without seeing them. 4 days of David asking if he was having some kind of breakdown. 4 days of driving past Rosewood Bistro 3 times a day like a stalker, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. On Thursday evening, Jake found himself standing outside Brew and Bean, staring at the corner table where they'd had their first real conversation. The barista, a college-aged kid with too many piercings and not enough patience, finally approached him. "Dude, you've been standing there for like 20 minutes. You ordering something or what?" "Sorry," Jake mumbled, but he didn't move. "You're that guy, aren't you?" the barista said suddenly. "The one who comes in here talking to himself about some girl named Riley." Jake's head snapped up. "I don't talk to myself." "You totally do. Yesterday you stood right there and had like a 10-minute conversation with thin air about butterflies and coffee dates." The kid grinned. "It was actually pretty entertaining." "Great," Jake muttered. "I've become the crazy guy." "Nah, man. You've become the guy in love. Totally different kind of crazy." The barista studied him with surprising wisdom for someone who looked like he was barely old enough to vote. "So, what are you gonna do about it?" "I don't know," Jake admitted. "I screwed up. Really badly." "How badly we talking? Like, forgot her birthday badly, or like, accidentally married her sister badly? Like, chose my career over her and then lied about it badly?" The barista winced. "Okay, that's pretty bad, but not unfixable." "How do you figure?" "Because you're here, dude. Standing in a coffee shop at 8 p.m. on a Thursday, talking to a stranger about your feelings. That's not the behavior of a guy who's given up." Jake stared at this surprisingly insightful college kid. "What would you do?" "Me? I'd probably write her a song or something. But you don't look like the singing type." The barista considered this. "What are you good at?" "Building things," Jake said automatically. "Designing spaces." "So design her something. Build her something. Show her what she means to you in the language you speak best." Jake felt something click into place in his mind. "You're right." "I know," the barista said with a grin. "I'm very wise for my age. You want a coffee while you're here?" "Actually," Jake said, pulling out his phone, "I need to make some calls." Meanwhile, Riley was discovering that heartbreak tasted like chocolate ice cream and felt like wearing pajamas to work, which she couldn't actually do, but she wanted to. "You're being ridiculous," Madison announced, bursting into Riley's room where she'd been hiding since Tuesday night. "It's been 4 days. You need to leave this room." "I left the room," Riley protested from under her blanket fort. "I went to work." "Work doesn't count. You need to go somewhere fun. Somewhere that doesn't remind you of Jake." "Everywhere reminds me of Jake," Riley said miserably. "The grocery store reminds me of Jake because we went shopping together. The coffee shop reminds me of Jake because that's where we had our first date. The restaurant reminds me of Jake because that's where we met. Even the bathroom reminds me of Jake because he texted me while I was in there once." "Okay, that last one is definitely oversharing," Madison said. "But my point stands. You're wallowing. I'm processing. You're eating ice cream for breakfast and talking to your plants about your feelings. Fernando is a very good listener," Riley defended. "And Samantha gives excellent advice." What did Samantha advise? To forget about him and focus on my own growth. See? Even your plant thinks you're being dramatic. Riley emerged from her blanket fort, looking like a beautiful disaster. What if he was right, though? What if I was just a distraction? What if 3 weeks really isn't long enough to know how you feel about someone? Madison sat on the edge of the bed, her expression softening. Riley, I've known you for 5 years. I've seen you date a lot of guys. I've never seen you light up the way you did with Jake. But, and more importantly, Madison continued, I've never seen a guy look at you the way Jake looked at you. That man was completely gone for you. Then why did he choose Hawaii? Because he's an idiot, Madison said simply. A sweet butterfly-phobic idiot who probably has no idea how to choose between the career he's worked his whole life for and the woman he's known for 3 weeks. Even if she is the love of his life. Riley stared at her roommate. You think I'm the love of his life? I think you're both idiots who are perfect for each other, Madison said. And I think you should give him a chance to fix this. He hasn't even tried to fix it, Riley pointed out. No calls, no texts, no dramatic gestures, nothing. Maybe he's working on something. Or maybe he's already in Hawaii building his dream resort and forgetting I ever existed. Before Madison could respond, Riley's phone rang. The caller ID made her heart stop. It's him, she whispered. Answer it. Madison hissed. I can't. Answer it or I will. Riley stared at the ringing phone, paralyzed by hope and terror in equal measure. Finally, on the last ring, she swiped to answer. Hello? She said, proud that her voice only shook a little. Riley. Jake's voice was rough, like he hadn't slept in days. Don't hang up, please. I'm listening, she said carefully. I need you to meet me somewhere. Jake, please, just give me one chance to show you something. And if after you see it, you still want me to leave you alone, I will. I'll go to Hawaii, and I'll never bother you again. Riley closed her eyes, her heart hammering. Where? The park on 5th Street. The one with the gazebo. Can you be there in an hour? Why? Because I built you something, Jake said quietly. And I need you to see it. An hour later, Riley stood at the entrance to Riverside Park, her palms sweating and her heart racing. She'd changed clothes 4 times before settling on a simple sundress, the same one she'd worn to their coffee date, though she wasn't sure why. The park was mostly empty, the evening light casting everything in a golden glow. Riley made her way toward the gazebo, unsure what she was expecting to find. What she found took her breath away. The gazebo had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. String lights were woven through the railings, creating a warm, magical atmosphere. The space was filled with potted plants, dozens of them, arranged with obvious care. There were fiddle-leaf figs and snake plants and succulents, all positioned to create a living, breathing garden in the small space. And in the center of it all stood Jake, looking nervous and hopeful and absolutely perfect. You built me a garden, Riley whispered, stepping into the gazebo. I built you a garden, Jake confirmed. With help from the nursery, full disclosure. I may have mentioned that I was trying to win back the love of my life, and apparently that's very motivating for plant people. Riley walked slowly through the space, touching the leaves of a particularly beautiful fern. Jake, this is... I know it's not enough, Jake said quickly. I know I hurt you, and I know I lied to you, and I know 3 weeks isn't very long, but Riley, I need you to know that these have been the best 3 weeks of my entire life. Riley turned to face him, tears already starting. I told David no, Jake continued. I told him I wasn't going to Hawaii. You what? I told him to find another architect because I couldn't leave you. I couldn't choose a career over the person who makes me want to be better at everything, including my career. Jake, you can't. Your dream project was never as important as my dream girl, Jake interrupted. And yes, I know that's cheesy and probably something out of a bad romantic comedy, but I don't care because it's true. Riley stared at him, overwhelmed. What about your future, your business? There will be other projects, Jake said, stepping closer, but there will never be another you. You barely know me, Riley said weakly. the argument sounding hollow even to her own ears. "I know that you talk to your plants because you have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met," Jake said, his voice gaining strength. "I know that you make terrible pasta but the most amazing coffee dates. I know that you light up when you laugh and you bite your lip when you're concentrating and you have this little freckle right here." He reached out to touch her nose. "That I want to kiss every day for the rest of my life." "Jake, I know that you're studying business because you want to open your own restaurant someday. And I know you're going to be incredible at it because you make everyone around you feel like they're the most important person in the world. I know that you're kind and funny and smart and beautiful, and I know that I'm completely, utterly, ridiculously in love with you." Riley's breath caught. "You love me?" "I love you," Jake said simply. "I've loved you since the moment you walked through that smoke like some kind of action hero carrying dessert. I've loved you through every terrible joke and every perfect kiss and every moment in between. And I'll love you whether you forgive me or not, whether you take me back or not, because loving you isn't a choice anymore, Riley. It's just who I am." Riley was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she looked around the magical garden he'd created for her. "The woman at the gallery," she said finally, "is a client whose husband is cheating on her and she needed someone to talk to," Jake said. "I should have told you about it immediately. I should have brought you with me. I should have done a lot of things differently. And Hawaii is a beautiful place that I will probably never visit, and I'm okay with that." Riley stepped closer to him, close enough to see the hope and fear warring in his eyes. "You really turned down Hawaii for me?" "I really turned down Hawaii for you. That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or the most stupid." Jake smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him all week. "Can it be both?" Riley laughed through her tears, and the sound was like music in the garden Jake had built for her. "I love you too," she whispered. Jake's face lit up like the sun. "Really? Really? I've been miserable without you. I've been talking to my plants about you, eating ice cream for breakfast and driving past the restaurant where you first made me laugh. I've been completely, utterly, ridiculously in love with you too." Jake cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "So where does that leave us?" "Right here," Riley said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. "In our garden." The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "So what happens now?" Riley asked. "Now," Jake said, pulling her close, "we figure it out together. All of it. Your restaurant dreams, my architecture career, our future. We figure it out together." "I like the sound of that," Riley said. "Me too," Jake said, then grinned. "Although I should probably mention that I have no idea how to take care of all these plants." Riley laughed. "Lucky for you, I know some very wise plants who give excellent relationship advice." "Perfect," Jake said, spinning her around the gazebo as the string lights twinkled above them. "I can't wait to meet them." As the sun set over their magical garden, Jake and Riley stood wrapped in each other's arms, both of them knowing that they'd found something worth fighting for. And for the first time in days, both of them believed in happy endings again. 1 year later. "I can't believe you're nervous," Madison said, adjusting the small bouquet of baby's breath in Riley's hair. "You literally serve hundreds of people every week at the restaurant." "That's different," Riley replied, smoothing down her simple white dress for the 10th time. "Those people aren't here to watch me marry the love of my life in a gazebo surrounded by plants that have somehow become our closest friends." Through the window of the small bridal cottage at Riverside Park, Riley could see the gazebo where Jake had built her a garden a year ago. It looked even more magical now, if that was possible. The plants had grown and flourished, creating a lush, romantic canopy. String lights twinkled in the late afternoon sun, and white fabric draped elegantly between the posts. "Fernando looks particularly dapper today," Madison observed, looking out at the fiddle leaf fig that had somehow become their unofficial wedding officiant. "I think Jake actually put a bow tie on him." Riley laughed, her nervousness melting into pure joy. "Of course he did. That man has turned into such a plant dad, it's ridiculous." Remember when he killed that succulent in the first week? Rip Sergio, Riley said solemnly. He died as he lived, overwatered and confused. A knock on the cottage door interrupted their plant memorial service. Riley? Came Jake's voice. I know I'm not supposed to see you, but I have an emergency. What kind of emergency? Riley called back, her heart immediately racing. Samantha is giving me the silent treatment, and I think Fernando is judging my tie choice. I need professional plant whisperer consultation. Riley and Madison burst into laughter. You're ridiculous, Riley called out. And you're not supposed to be here. I'm not looking, I'm just standing behind this door having a crisis of plant confidence. Madison rolled her eyes and opened the door just enough to stick her head out. What's wrong with your tie? Marcus said it makes me look like a used car salesman, and now Fernando won't make eye contact with me. Jake Morrison, Madison said with mock seriousness. Fernando is a plant. He doesn't have eyes. He has very expressive leaves, Jake protested. And they're currently expressing disappointment. Riley couldn't help herself. She opened the door wide enough to see Jake, gorgeous in his navy suit, hair slightly mussed from nervous running his hands through it, and yes, wearing a tie that was perhaps a bit too shiny. Hi, she said softly. Hi, Jake replied, his entire face lighting up when he saw her. You look like a princess who talks to plants? Like the most beautiful woman in the world who happens to have excellent communication skills with greenery. Riley felt tears prick her eyes. Your tie is perfect. Really? Really? Although, she reached out and adjusted it slightly. Fernando prefers it a little to the left. Jake grinned. I knew it. He's very particular about fashion. Okay, you two are nauseating, Madison interrupted. Jake, get out of here before someone sees you. Riley, stop looking at him like he hung the moon. He did hang the moon, Riley said dreamily, still gazing at Jake. Technically, the moon hangs itself, Jake said. Gravity and orbital mechanics and all that. My fiancé, the romantic, Riley laughed. Your fiancé who is about to become your husband in exactly 37 minutes, Jake said, checking his watch. Not that I'm counting. Not at all, Riley agreed. Now go away before Madison throws something at you. I don't throw things, Madison protested. I have excellent aim, so it wouldn't be throwing, it would be tactical projectile placement. Jake backed away from the door, hands raised in surrender. Going, gone. See you at the altar, future Mrs. Morrison. See you there, future Mr. Riley's husband. After Jake left, Riley sat down in the small chair, feeling overwhelmed with happiness. You know, Madison said, sitting beside her, a year ago, if someone had told me that my roommate would fall in love with a guy who compared her to a swan and then marry him in a garden that he built specifically for her, surrounded by plants with names and personalities, I would have suggested therapy. And now? Now I think you're the luckiest woman alive, and Jake is the luckiest man, and I'm very proud to be the maid of honor in the weirdest, sweetest love story I've ever witnessed. Riley hugged her best friend, careful not to mess up her hair. Thank you for everything, for pushing me to give him a second chance, for helping plan this crazy plant wedding, for putting up with me practicing my vows on Fernando for 3 months. That's what best friends are for, Madison said, although I still think you should have let me plan a bachelorette party. Dinner at the new sushi place with you, Jake's sister Emma, and 2 bottles of wine was perfect, Riley said. Besides, Jake's bachelor party was Marcus dragging him to Home Depot to buy more plant food, so I think we matched energy levels appropriately. A different knock interrupted them, this one more official. Ladies, it's time, called David, Jake's business partner who had somehow become the unofficial wedding coordinator. The groom is in position and only slightly green around the gills. The plants are ready. The small but distinguished crowd is seated. Let's make some magic happen. Riley stood up, taking one last look in the mirror. A year ago, she'd been a waitress studying business part-time, living paycheck to paycheck, and convinced that love was something that happened to other people. Now she was the co-owner of Riley's Garden Cafe, the restaurant she'd opened 6 months ago with Jake's help, and an investor who'd fallen in love with her business plan. She was marrying her best friend, her partner, her favorite person in the world. And she was surrounded by plants that had somehow become family. "Ready?" Madison asked, handing her the bouquet of wildflowers that Jake had specifically chosen because they were cheerful, unpretentious, and reminded him of Riley's laugh. "Ready," Riley said. They walked out of the cottage and toward the gazebo, where a small gathering of their favorite people waited. Riley's parents had flown in from Georgia, beaming with pride. Jake's parents sat next to them, his mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Marcus stood next to Jake as best man, grinning widely. Emma, Jake's sister, waved from her seat in the front row. Tommy and Ben, Jake's other groomsmen, were trying to look serious but failing miserably. And there, waiting for her under the canopy of lights and leaves, was Jake. He was talking to Fernando, actually having a conversation with the fiddle-leaf fig, and Riley could see his lips moving. Probably asking the plant for advice on not fainting during the ceremony. As if he could sense her watching, Jake looked up and their eyes met across the garden. His face transformed with such pure joy and love that Riley felt her heart stop and restart in a completely different rhythm. The music started, a soft acoustic guitar version of their song, the jazz tune that had been playing in the restaurant the night they met. Riley began walking down the aisle of grass between the chairs, Madison beside her, and everything else faded away except Jake. When she reached the gazebo, Jake stepped forward to meet her. "Hi," he whispered. "Hi," she whispered back. "You look like a goddess who gardens," Jake said softly. "That's a new one." Riley laughed quietly. "I'm expanding my animal comparison repertoire to include mythological beings." "I love you," Riley said. "I love you too." David cleared his throat loudly. As Jake's business partner and the only one among them ordained online specifically for this wedding, he was taking his officiant duties very seriously. "Dearly beloved plants and distinguished guests," David began, earning chuckles from the small crowd. "We are gathered here today in this garden that love built, literally since Jake spent 2 weeks learning about soil pH and proper drainage to make this space perfect for Riley's plant family." Riley looked around at their living, growing wedding venue. The plants had indeed become family. Fernando stood tall and proud next to David, his leaves rustling gently in the breeze. Samantha, the snake plant, held court near the entrance with several of her succulent friends. The squad, the collection of small succulents, were arranged like tiny wedding guests along the gazebo railings. "Jake and Riley," David continued, "have asked to write their own vows because apparently they have things to say to each other that are too personal for traditional wedding vows, and also because Riley insisted that Fernando had to be mentioned by name." Jake stepped forward, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Riley," he began, his voice steady but emotional. "A year and a half ago, I walked into a restaurant for dinner with friends and walked out with my entire world changed. You appeared in my life like magic, graceful, kind, and completely unimpressed by my complete inability to function like a normal human being in your presence." Laughter rippled through the small gathering. "You taught me that love isn't just about the big moments. It's about sharing terrible cooking disasters and having deep conversations with plants. It's about someone who laughs at your worst jokes and makes you want to be better at everything, including taking care of succulents." He looked directly at the squad, who seemed to approve. "You taught me that sometimes the best plans are the ones you throw away for something unexpected and wonderful. You taught me that home isn't a place you build. It's a person you choose to grow with, every single day." Jake's voice caught slightly and he took a breath before continuing. "So today, in front of Fernando and Samantha and the squad and all our favorite humans, I promise to water your plants when you forget. I promise to taste test every terrible recipe you want to try. I promise to hold your hand through every butterfly encounter, and I promise to love you through every adventure, every challenge, and every perfectly imperfect moment of our beautifully chaotic life together." Riley was crying now, but she was also smiling so hard her face hurt. "Also," Jake added, grinning, "I promise to never again compare you to farm animals, aquatic creatures, or waterfowl. I've learned that you're incomparable. That's probably for the best." Riley laughed through her tears. She pulled out her own folded paper, hands shaking slightly. "Jake," she began, "before I met you, I thought I knew what I wanted. I had plans, goals, a very sensible 5-year timeline. And then you walked into my restaurant and forgot how to speak English, and somehow that was the moment my real life began." Jake grinned, remembering. "You taught me that love doesn't follow timelines or make sense or fit into neat categories. You taught me that the right person will build you a garden just to see you smile, will give up their dream job just to stay by your side, and will learn the names and personalities of all your plants because they matter to you." Riley looked around at their green wedding guests. "You taught me that partnership means someone who believes in your dreams even when they seem impossible, who celebrates your successes like they're his own, and who makes you laugh even when you're trying to be serious during important life moments." She looked directly at Jake, her voice growing stronger. "So today, in our garden, surrounded by the life we've built together, I promise to support your dreams as fiercely as you support mine. I promise to always laugh at your plant jokes, even the really bad ones. I promise to let you design our future home, as long as it has excellent natural light for our ever-growing plant family." More laughter from their guests. "And I promise to love you through every perfectly planned moment and every beautifully chaotic surprise, because with you, even the unexpected feels like coming home." Riley folded her paper and looked at Jake, who was now also crying. "Also," she added with a grin, "I promise to never make you eat my experimental pasta again. That was just cruel." "Thank you," Jake said solemnly. "That means more to me than you know." David wiped his own eyes and stepped forward. "Okay, you two are making everyone cry, including Fernando, and I think his leaves are getting dehydrated from all this emotion." He opened his little ceremony book, which Riley suspected was just something he'd printed from the internet that morning. "Do you, Jake Morrison, take Riley to be your wife, your partner in all things, your fellow plant parent, and your companion in terrible cooking adventures?" "I do," Jake said firmly. "Forever and always." "Do you, Riley Catherine Williams, take Jake to be your husband, your partner in all things, your fellow dreamer, and your companion in perfectly imperfect love?" "I do," Riley said, her voice clear and strong. "Forever and always." "Then by the power vested in me by the internet and the state of Illinois, I now pronounce you husband and wife," David announced. "Jake, kiss your bride before Fernando starts judging us all for taking too long." Jake cupped Riley's face in his hands and kissed her as their friends and family cheered, and Riley could swear she heard the plants rustling their approval. When they finally broke apart, both of them laughing and crying at the same time, David held up his hands for quiet. "Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished plant life, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Morrison. Proof that love at first sight is real, that grand gestures work, and that sometimes the best families are the ones you grow yourself." As rice and flower petals rained down on them, biodegradable of course because Riley insisted they couldn't harm the garden, Jake spun Riley around the gazebo where they'd first said, "I love you." "So, Mrs. Morrison," Jake said when he set her down, "how does it feel to be married to a guy who talks to plants?" "Perfect," Riley said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him again. "Absolutely perfect. Even though I accidentally referred to Samantha as Sandra during the ceremony rehearsal." "She'll forgive you," Riley laughed. "She's very understanding." "Good, because I think Fernando is planning to give a speech at the reception." Riley looked over at their fiddle leaf fig, who did indeed seem to be rustling importantly. "I love our ridiculous life," she said. "Me too," Jake agreed. "Every perfectly imperfect moment of it." As their small wedding party moved toward the cafe for dinner, prepared by a professional chef because Riley and Jake had learned their culinary limitations, Marcus approached them with a grin. "So," he said, "I have news." "Good news or bad news?" Jake asked suspiciously. "Depends on your perspective," Marcus said. "David got a call yesterday. The Hawaii resort people want to meet with you about a different project. Something about designing their new flagship location in Chicago." Jake and Riley looked at each other, then back at Marcus. "When?" Riley asked. Next month. Apparently, word got out about the amazing architect who turned down Hawaii for love, and now every romantic resort chain in the country wants to hire the guy who builds gardens for his girlfriend. Wife, Jake corrected automatically. Wife, Marcus agreed with a grin. The guy who builds gardens for his wife. Jake looked at Riley, eyebrows raised in question. What do you think, Mrs. Morrison? Want to design a romantic resort in Chicago? Riley grinned. As long as it has excellent natural light for plants. Deal, Jake said, kissing her forehead. I love you, you beautiful plant-whispering, dream-supporting woman. I love you too, you butterfly-fearing, garden-building, perfectly imperfect man. As the sun set over their wedding reception, Jake and Riley danced to the same jazz song that had been playing the night they met, surrounded by their friends, their family, and their ever-growing collection of plants that had somehow become the most important wedding guests of all. And if Fernando rustled his leaves in approval, and if Samantha seemed to sway to the music, and if the squad appeared to be having their own tiny celebration in their pots along the gazebo railing, well, that was just proof that love really did make everything grow. The end.